Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Trintech and the Hackett Group. My name is Kelly Shevlin, and I'll be your host for today. The title of today's webinar is How to Prepare Your Organization for the Future of Financial Automation. Before we get started, there are a couple pieces of housekeeping I'd like to go over. Firstly, please note that the lines are on mute to cut down on any background noise. However, you can send through any questions or comments as we go along through the webinar today through the chat or Q&A functionalities on the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of the hour, we should have some time to go over a few of these, so just feel free to send those through whenever you have them. Second, throughout the webinar, we will be asking you guys a few poll questions as well. For those of you looking for a CPE credit today, please stay on the webinar for the entire webinar session, but most importantly, participate in all 3 of the poll questions asked during the session. Finally, just so you know, we are recording today's webinar session, and we will send out an email after the event with a copy of the recording in case you'd like to view it again later. And with that, it is my honor to introduce our speakers for today, Bill from the Hackett Group and Cyril and Robert from Trintech, who will take us through today's presentation. Robert, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Kelly, and hello, everybody. I'm Robert Miglowitz, Chief Strategy Officer for Trintech. I've spent the last 8 years here at Trintech. I've spent over 20 years working with finance teams, managing their financial close and record report process, really in concert with an ever-changing technology landscape for the Office of Finance. My role also entails ensuring our Trintech solutions and our partnerships provide extended value to this growing ecosystem. So it's good to be here today. Thank you. Bill?
Thanks, and thank you, Robert. My name is Bill Marchioni, and I am with the Hackett Group, and I am the global leader of Hackett's Account Report Advisory Program, and it is a pleasure to be here today with everyone. In my role at Hackett, I work with companies of all different sizes and complexities and industries and business models and levels of maturity as they try to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of their record-to-report organizations and of their related service delivery model. A little bit about the Hackett Group. We're a global business advisory firm that helps organizations improve the performance of their finance, HR, IT, and procurement organizations. We have a benchmarking service line and have been collecting performance data for over a quarter of a century, and we have done several thousands of benchmark studies. And we have other service lines around strategic transformation and enterprise performance management and business intelligence, and a training and certification institute. But I'm really pleased to be here today to share with you insights from some recent polling that we did, really trying to understand the impacts of COVID-19. What are organizations seeing? What are they experiencing? What are they expecting and anticipating? As a result of the lockdown mitigation strategy.
Bill, thank you. And Robert, thank you as well for both of you joining us today. This is Cyril Mathai, everybody. I lead our partner network here at Trintech and have been around Trintech for about 10 and a half years. And prior to that, actually was a customer of Trintech as well. So we're excited to go through the conversation today. I know, in the midst of the state of our world affairs, if you will, where we're at, and then thinking about the future of finance or automation concepts may not necessarily be what we think is a natural conversation for this time. But I think as we've seen over the last last couple of months and the last several days, the idea of how we cope with current state affairs and the role and function that we serve to the organizations within finance, the two ultimately go hand in hand. So our conversation today is really going to be focusing around that. Let's talk a little bit about the format for our conversation. So today, as Bill kind of mentioned, Hackett had actually performed a survey that is related to findings and experiences around the pandemic. Trintech had actually also done a survey, just completed a survey just before the pandemic started, really the kind of shelter in place orders that had gone in. So obviously there's a view that some of the survey responses potentially on the Trintech side may not be relevant, but I think as you'll find, and as we talk through the discussion, both from a perspective of the Hackett side of the organization or process, you'll see that these two kind of go hand in hand, and ultimately the pain, if you will, that's felt in the processes today, especially, are because of the underlying issues that exist within organizations to support the finance organization. So we'll go through that. one comment I do want to make is, and we have enjoyed quite a bit of history with the Hackett Group around sorry, was getting connection notices here, so I want to make sure we're still live. But we've enjoyed a long relationship with the Hackett Group. Just for those of you that may have missed it, just a couple of weeks ago, we actually announced an alliance and partnership with the consulting side of the Hackett Group, where they actually leverage the Trintech technology now to deploy finance transformation around the record-to-report process, leveraging the Trintech set. So we're excited about that and kind of a full end-to-end relationship, if you will, with the Hackett Group. So forgot to mention that a little bit earlier, but want to make sure you guys know, as you're thinking about finance transformation for your organization, we would love to engage you in a conversation with the Hackett team as well to see how they could help support those efforts. All right. So with that in mind, Bill, what I'd love for you to do as we step into the first question is, before we get into the response and interpretation of those questions, I'd love for you to maybe size up, how was the survey conducted? What was what were the elements around that survey before we get started? But as we move into the first question really is around helping, identify what expectations around GDP growth from your respondents were. So would you mind first just taking us through how we got to the survey, and then also your views on this as well?
Yeah, sure can. And like I mentioned, Hackett recently conducted a survey. We really wanted to better understand what companies were seeing and experiencing and expecting as a result of the COVID-19 shutdown strategy. And so we surveyed about 100 different organizations. The survey was conducted in April. It was done in April by design. What we wanted to do was really get some very fresh and raw insights from the organizations who had just closed the books for the month of March. Right? For most organizations, that's your quarterly close. But everyone had to go through some kind of closing effort, and we really wanted to get that pulse, understand it. And so the results and the survey that we're looking at here is really fresh off, hot off the press. And so let's dive into this first question. So what are the expectations regarding GDP growth? And when we look at these questions, we're going to start with kind of the high level macro, and then work our way down to kind of more micro, and then ultimately look at the counter-report close. And one thing I didn't mention, people we surveyed were probably 50% record-to-report professionals, and the other 50% CFO level type professionals. So 73% believe that it's going to take 18 to 24 months to get back to normal, or something resembling normal, right? That's nearly 3/4 of the respondents believe it's going to be a year and a half or 2 years before the economies are anywhere close to being back to normal. And there's another 7% that believe it will take more than 2 years. So you add those two together, you got 81% of the organization saying it's at a minimum a year and a half before we get back to anything, resembling normal. And that is very significant, right? And it has a significant impact on how companies and finance professionals and record-to-report professionals, how they need to think about their people, their processes, and their technology, and what we at Hackett refer to as the record-to-report service delivery model, right? So they need to think and envision and design and operate and manage for long-term agility. And they need to do this while they're managing volatility and risk, right? We've got operational risk, financial risk, control risk, and reporting risk. Another 13% think that there'll be a new normal within 12 months. They probably don't know what that new normal will look like, but they intuitively understand that things will be significantly different. And really only 7% believe we're looking at a quick recovery or anything quick return to what we're accustomed to.
And Cyril, just to add to some of what Bill data was able to capture there, we work with nearly 4,000 companies across the globe. So in some of the conversations we've had with them, they seem to mirror this quite a bit. I mean, there's definitely specific differences in certain verticals, right, that have been impacted in different ways through all this. I think one other thing we're also hearing finance organizations starting to model for is a potential another curve here, which is a W, which is more or less if there is a recurrence in the second half of the year. If we start to get recovery, but we have another dip, does a potentially a W come up here? And that's something they're trying to plan for. And that's very important for as they're looking at just how they're structuring the finances and the ongoing businesses, specifically in certain areas. So I think with that, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of unfolds. Is which shape do we take? I've heard a couple of them even say, look, we're looking at the Nike logo. It's looking more like a swoosh. It's a big drop, and this is gradually going to come over time. We're just trying to understand what that potential timeline really is. So that's just some additional context, I think, that we're also seeing within the companies that we deal with around the world.
Thank you for that, for both of you. I think even just in the last few hours, there's been some new news reports that are starting to come out of different geos are stepping in, trying to step back into some level of normalcy, and there's a retraction that's starting to occur as well. So that W that you spoke of, Robert, may really tie to that. So let's move to the second question that was part of the Hackett survey. What is COVID-19 really going to do to the revenue of the organization? What does that do from an outlook perspective? Bill, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure will. And, Robert just made reference to verticals and verticals being impacted differently. And we see that in the numbers here. And the results reflect both the demand and the supply shock, right? So 23% of the companies are expecting an increase in revenue. And that's a very, very nice position to be in right now, right? But it still raises questions, right? It raises questions around scalability and reliability and the predictability and repeatability of the current finance and record-to-report processes, right? Have they been pressure tested? How are the processes built for these increased volumes? Is the talent prepared to work through additional and sometimes more complex transactions? What about increased demands, from the business side, from customers, and also increased, reporting requirements? So it's nice to be in the 23%, but again, has the process been pressure tested, and how will it survive long term over the next couple of years, through those stresses? So 73% of the companies, almost 3/4 of the companies out there, expect a decrease in revenue, and so 23% expect a decrease. That's up to 10%. You've got another 31% expect a revenue decrease in the 11 to 25% range. And 23% of the companies expect a revenue decrease of greater than 25%. So clearly, there's a lot of organizations that are being shocked and having to deal with significant change. It's going to impact a lot of what we do, right? Cash flow, from a reporting and a forecasting and a visibility perspective. The increased importance or refocus on working capital management, risk management, operational excellence, and finance and accounting excellence. So all of the kind of the increased internal and external demands on record-to-report organizations are going to necessitate that these organizations operate with optimal efficiency and effectiveness.
Just not to put you on the spot, but a question that kind of came through is, do you think that increases the difference, increase versus decreases the difference between essential and non-essential? Or I didn't know if your study kind of found any of that to be true.
When I think of essential versus non-essential, oftentimes we think of essential versus non-essential workers. And yes, I know some businesses are, hospitals are essential, and healthcare gyms may not be, considered essential. We didn't really look at it that way. We looked at it more in the industry. But even within industries, you're going to see differences, right? So you talk about retail, depending on how you define companies, right? You've got Amazon, who's growing and growing and growing, and may get permanent market share out of this and be even bigger than they ever were. At the same time that there's going to be shutdowns and bankruptcies within the industry. So it's industry verticals, but then you also have to peel back the onion within the industry. So.
Got it. Well, you kind of mentioned essential or non-essential as it relates to people within organizations. That kind of is a good segue into the next question, which is really around the human resource response to COVID-19. How are you seeing, or what was the survey really telling us there?
Yeah, so 100% of the people are working from home, and that's not going to be a surprise to anybody. Essentially all countries and regions and states and cities are in some form of lockdown. So that's not a surprise. But what that does is it raises lots of questions, right? So what does the next phase of the recovery look like? Will we be asked to come back to the office as a regular operating procedure, or will remote work become part of the new normal? And it was the CEO of Barclays who recently said, the days of having 7,000 people all commute in to be in the same office complex, that may be gone, right? So there's going to be some real questions around the work environment, and I think everyone knows that, right? The question for us is, are the record-to-report processes aligned for this, right? Do we have the processes that are adequate for the long term for any kind of remote work that needs to be done? 93% of the companies have instituted communication programs to ensure that the workforce is kept fully up to speed with changing circumstances. 43% have had to make additional investments in their hardware and software and networks for the remote working model. It just wasn't part of what they did in any significant measure, and they had to ramp up for that, right? So 14% have had to furlough staff in response to the revenue losses. And a company that we know is having rolling furloughs throughout their entire organization, and that includes the record-to-report organization. So when you have 30%, it's a 30% number, so when 30% of your staff at any one time are being furloughed, are you prepared for that, right? How scalable and agile is your business model for that? The thing here that caught my eye, and I think it's a positive amongst all of this, is there's 21% have canceled their transformation projects, but think about the reciprocal. So what that really means is nearly 80% of the organizations are continuing on their transformation journey. And in the discussions that we've had with our clients, digital makes a difference. We know that transformation projects that help organizations drive to a more digital finance and record-to-report organization, if they're already in progress, they're being accelerated. And if they were in the planning stage, they're being green-lighted. So driving to digital has become incredibly important and urgent right now.
Thank you, Bill. Robert, anything maybe specifically around that human capital component that you'd want to speak into on this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. As a technology provider for finance, it's very common for us to get into the conversations of where technology meets people or interacts with people. So technology by itself can be great, but also there's as many that have embarked on technology engagements, there's change management that's also involved, which is just involves humans working differently or bringing different skill sets forward. So, it's a unique time right now to actually be embarking on that. So, to what Bill was mentioning, we're seeing that the push for automation, virtual, and transformation projects, those still need to move forward. And in some ways, specifically around interest around automation and virtual, those are accelerating exponentially for obvious reasons. But the impact or how that interacts with the human capital side is quite interesting. Before all this happened, many companies were dealing with the challenges of even attracting talent. We were all experiencing some of the lowest unemployment rates in the last 50 years. So it was more or less, where do you find the talent? Now, so many companies are really trying to focus in on what experience or how am I going to empower the employees that I have to be the most effective in this different environment, so that they basically go through an experience where they feel like they are doing a good job, providing a lot of value. And this is a company that when we come on the backside of this, that they still want to be a part of. So, there's companies talking, and you're seeing this quite a bit about, take care of your people, because as we all know, when we come out the backside of this, we're all going to need good people to be a part of our organization. So, there's the term, the new normal that's out there quite a bit. I know it keeps going around, but, I'm actually seeing a different term on this side. It's being called the new balance. And what I mean by that is when I interact with companies and people, they're really talking about, hey, in finance, maybe I don't have to be in that office all the time. Maybe I don't have to be there around the clock. So is there a different way for me to actually, as a finance professional, to be effective while also having a different type of balance in my life. So, that's the perspective that we're seeing, where companies are really are trying to focus in on, look, these are valuable assets to the company, and we're going to need these people on the other side, but we know we're going to have to empower them differently than we probably were in the past. So that's a lot of what we're seeing, Cyril.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there certainly is probably, if you're a LinkedIn follower, if you're a Reddit follower, whatever, the number of articles or information that go out now that are really driving people to be sensitive to the workforce and what they're having to go through to cope with current circumstances has been amazing and extremely positive. Bill, you as you were answering this, you kind of asked that question: Are our finance and the record to report processes, are they aligned to what this? And hate to use that word again, or phrase again, the new normal. That kind of takes us to the next question, which: what are the main impacts of COVID-19 on the account to report or record to report process? And just so everybody knows, Hackett terminology refers to account to report, and we at the Trintech side call it record to report. It's the same thing, just a different terminology phrase, but just so you know or don't get confused. But Bill, what were the findings here?
Yeah, so 87%. That's a big number. They indicated that managing the virtual work to ensure the same productivity that the team delivered while it was on site and in the office, right? So how do you ensure that people are productive? Not that you don't trust them, but you got to get a lot of stuff done. There's a tremendous amount of coordination that has to happen. So this takes additional focus. It takes clear transparency on the status of work steps, and it requires excellent management skills. And these companies, these 87%, they're planning for a future model of remote work. There's no question about it. It's just kind of what degree. 47% indicated, the impact of additional analysis on them. So they're being asked to do different types of analysis or to resurrect analysis that hadn't been as critical in the past. And we think this is an area, we at the Hackett Group, that is going to grow significantly. That in essence, we're going to be asked to do more than we ever had before. So there's that renewed focus on cash flow, on working capital, things that maybe tangentially we thought about, but it was very routine. Questions around solvency and capital adequacy. What about insurance coverage, counterparty risks, the adequacy of our provisions? We're going to have more discussions with the auditors. It's going to be more frequent. They're going to be much less straightforward, and they're going to be on critical business issues. And like I said, so we fully expect that demand for this type of insight and analysis is going to increase as the lockdowns continue. And even when the lockdowns are over, the macro and micro impact of that strategy as it reverberates through regions, economies, and industries. We're going to be asked to do more than we have, and that increased level of deliverable is going to be here for a while. The other thing, and this gets to the people part of it, 40% are still dealing with personal fears. Fears for themselves, they have worry and anxiety, or fear for their team members.
Cyril, if I could, I'll jump in here really quick, just on a couple of additional things on here. The second item here about the delivery of systems, the 27% via virtual access. From a technology perspective, for finance professionals, the things to be thinking about here is really the increased focus now on cybersecurity standards, as really there's a lot more finance data that is either being accessed remotely or being residing in people's homes, actually, where it wasn't before. So, the security piece of this is something that, is not to be discounted, because I know the CIO offices and the CTOs and the CISOs are very focused on this, but within the office of the CFO, it's a key area to consider. And then just to build on what Bill would say, we're to the 47% on the new analysis, and I fully agree with you, Bill. I think that number's going up. I think that's going to go up really in subsequent quarters. So, the teams that were handling the financial close, the record to report process, they're having to manage a lot more of these working capital, cash flow items than they have before. And, they definitely jumped through hoops and found a way to do that. But for this quarter that we just finished, but I think what we're likely to see is this number go up as you need to look at those processes, or people are looking at those processes to determine what are really sustainable and what needs to change, because this is likely to become a bigger item as we go through the year, subsequent quarters, and especially when we get to year-end audit requests, and you pile those on top of these team members as well. So those are just two, Cyril, that I think are worth expanding on.
Yeah, thank you. Just to maybe beat the dead horse a little bit, that last point that you kind of bring up is really one of those tie-outs to what happens in the record to report process, right? And we can't divorce the idea that people or companies are having to look at working capital, look at cash, for instance, as an example. If I'm having to look at a revolver, that it just increases the need to ensure that cash reconciliations are up to date, right? I can't make my cash assumptions off of data that hasn't necessarily been validated. And so it is creating the crunch and stressors, if you will, going back to the accounting teams to make sure, hey, can you help me understand timing of cash, or our balances on the general ledger appropriate, or how does general ledger cash reflect what our treasury system is showing as online balances, if you will. So, just even that simple example just reinforces the need to ensure that we have quick ability to go through those validation exercises, reconciliation capabilities. And the same thing relates to other assets, if you will, and even liabilities on the balance sheet as well. So when companies say, or when we in the accounting organizations understand that our organization is going through these types of analysis, I think we also need to just remind ourselves that the underlying activities that go to validate those numbers shouldn't be ignored. We need to make sure that we've done our steps. It's not just about getting to the financial reports. It's also now enabling a better analysis. And, we don't want to borrow money if we don't have to, but if we haven't done those things to validate our numbers, we need to make sure we've done those things. So thank you for that. I think as a final question on the Hackett survey, really kind of drills down a little bit further into the experiences around this most recent quarter end. Bill, do you want to walk us through what were companies experiencing?
Yeah, so what do we know about the most recent quarter, right? So a third of the companies, 33%, indicated that the close was very much like normal, and kudos to them. What we know about a lot of these companies is that these are companies that already had a mature close and consolidation process that they had infused with best practices. And there are also companies that had leveraged to some degree, at least, a remote working model. So they were more prepared, right? So that's good news. 47%, almost half of the companies had as they would describe, a tougher time than usual closing, but they were able to do so, and they were able to hit the key deadlines. So what do we mean by tougher time, and how do we define tougher time? And I'll give you an example. One of the organizations, the executive vice president of global business services, she was personally reviewing and approving manual journal entries and reconciliations at 10 o'clock at night during the close. That is not where their model needs to be. And they know that, right? But there's things you can do, right? This heroic first quarter close, all hands on deck, we're in this together. But that's not workable for the next year and a half to 2 years, right? And that's what this company expects, it's going to be before their economics return to any semblance of normal. And 20% of the companies are worse off than that, right? They had an even more difficult time doing their quarterly close. So clearly that's an urgent call to action for these companies to transform and to digitize their record to report service delivery model, the people, the processes, and the technology.
Sure. I'll just jump in. I'll just jump in real quick. I mean, this to me, this is just a really interesting data set, because I think this is likely one of those areas where, the full story is yet to be told. This is a point. So, many companies found a way to facilitate this closed period, but I will say that a lot of the companies we're talking to, they're actually expecting this next quarter to be much more challenging as they operate not just a portion of their quarter remotely, but the entire period. And so that's just I'll be curious to see how this kind of unfolds as we go forward, because as we talked about earlier, there's so many individuals that through a lot of energy and a lot of extra effort found ways to get through this quarter. And they had some things within the quarter already done before they had to move to a virtual environment, but now they're in a total virtual environment for a full quarter. And I think the real question that they're looking at is the way they did it really sustainable? Can they do that every quarter that way? And are they going to have the access to the right information, to the right people on the right time to achieve this? This is it's a key area for finance teams to be focused. To Bill's point earlier, it's why I think one of the main reasons you're still seeing companies say, look, business automation or these types of transformation pieces are going to have to move forward, because it's really questioning of what we just did. Is it really something that we can sustain as we move forward?
Yeah, thank you. I think, the reality is right. Many of the companies that we're talking to today and organizations across the world all have inspirational leadership. So at the point of pandemic starting, many leaders have stepped in to inspire their staff to do what they can to maintain as much of normal as we possibly can through this. And that plays into the corporate citizenship, right? Of let me do my part, let me extol my heart here to drive as best of a connection between current state and the previous normal that we used to know, so that way we don't have any disruption to service. But I think the metric that was brought up earlier around the 40% of respondents are somewhat in fear, either for themselves and for team members, is driving people. That fear is driving people to just work those long hours. How do I maintain status quo? How do I make sure that I or my team members are not subject to, hey, you didn't perform as well as we needed you to, so we're going to have to go find staff that have bigger hearts than you or something. So, how do I make sure that I have a job after all of this and that we don't lose the business, if that makes sense? Thank you for that. That kind of brings out the Hackett questions that were brought through the survey. Again, that we talked about were done in April, right? Kind of in the heart of the pandemic. We're going to move into our first poll question, but from there, we're going to move into the Trintech side of the survey and again, talk through how that connects to some of the things that we just saw from the Hackett survey as well. So Kelly?
Perfect. Thanks, Cyril. Okay, guys, that poll should now be showing on each of your screens. I've set 45 seconds for you all to answer each one of these poll questions. So the first question is, as you move to a virtual close, which processes were you able to leverage technology? Please note that we do not consider Excel technology. Your options are A, reconciliation, B, close management, C, intercompany, D, journal entry, or E, we have not been able to leverage technology for any processes. Perfect. I'll turn it back over to you, Cyril.
Great. Thank you. So as we kind of step into the first question, let me give you guys a little bit of background here. So the survey was conducted at the end of Q4 timeframe in 2019. So it ended at probably around December, early January timeframe. We had talked to about 200 different companies, which represent about 31 different countries as well across the globe. So what we were trying to do is discover what had been automated, what was currently in the process of being automated, and also from a survey respondent perspective, what they saw as the future around automation in their finance function. The responses point to the challenges when working in the traditional accounting setup, meaning the answers were made based on my normal, get to the office, however, whether I come through the tube, whether I come through a car, whether I walk to the office or bike to the office, but I'm getting to the office ultimately and performing that job function there around the staff that I'm familiar with, shaking hands with, or going to get coffee at the same time with. We had planned to share this actually this month already, and obviously we had to kind of rethink how we present these data points that didn't consider the current virtual or remote environment that we're all now working in. But as we look closely, what we realized is there's actually connections between the responses that came in from late last year to now into the environments that we're experiencing, right? As we've already talked about, the hero story, or the term I like to use is the brute force component, is really at work right? And what we're seeing is that they're working individuals like you are working right now to overcome the challenges that have always existed in the financial closing or the record to report process. But these are being done manually, and ultimately you're overlooking quality in certain scenarios, or you're doubling down rather on efforts to collaborate. And this has found its way through daily stand-up calls, whether they're video or audio only, but just traipsing through the steps or the things that we know need to happen. Sometimes that's a manual collection of activities, or sometimes there's an actual list that's being used to manage. But because of that, our continued view here is that we have to look at the challenges in the finance organization and say that we have to look to understand where those problems and obstacles exist for you and determine how we ultimately go about solving for that. With that in mind, then, what we want to do is highlight some of the questions and responses that came through and ensure you begin to build the business case on being the organization that comes out better in the end. As we've seen different articles that have resorted to the fact, or maybe you're a big FaceTime person and you see all the memes that are out there about how we may be coming out 60 pounds stronger or 60 pounds bigger after the end of this pandemic or shelter in versus, a healthier version of ourselves. And in the same way we look at that individually, we do have to look at that from an organizational perspective. Are we able to utilize the learnings of how we can work better, faster, and stronger in a remote only environment and apply that to once we do return to the normal, which may be we're all back to the office, or there's a hybrid of that where we're leave functioning and or functioning in the office. How can we take what we're learning right now and build that into a better future for ourselves? So with that, let's look at some of the questions. And the first one is looking at it across the entire record to report process. What were our surveys and the respondents to that survey seeing as the biggest challenges over the next 5 years? So as you can see, really over 35% of the challenges were related to people. And that's kind of the attracting talent, and then also the employee burnout that we saw in really overtime, right? And if you think about overtime as a concept now, it's even more so. And then there's other elements here around some of the activities that point to quality, or just some of the activities that that have to occur towards the tail end, just to tie it down, make sure that everything's been buttoned up twice. And that goes to the post-close adjustments or the entries that have to happen after consolidation occurred, or as we go through PVCs. Do we know for certain that we're ready for audit? Do we know for certain that we've done what we needed to do to ensure that our financials and our disclosures are appropriately reported upon? Bill, anything that you see here from a Hackett point of view that you would agree?
Yeah, there are a few things I'd like to comment on. The first is completing quality work. And we don't live in a static world, and COVID-19 drives that home. But even before COVID-19, companies were wrestling with the challenges of building agile processes, right? Processes that can scale, they can flex, they can change with changes in the business. And prior to the crisis, this was M&A, it was competitive disruption, it was business decisions. And so underlying agility is paramount to completing quality work. And we can't emphasize that enough. Another thing that caught my eye was meeting deadlines. And you see a number like 8%. And a lot of times you see a small number and you think, okay, there's a non-issue there. I have a hunch that there might be an issue there, and there might be a bigger problem. And to be somewhat brutal, complacency and lack of vision. There's a lot of companies out there, and we talk to them frequently, who have kind of just settled into a generally accepted cycle time, a generally accepted level of effort. We've been doing it for a long time. It may be mediocre, we don't know, but either consciously or unconsciously, they've kind of just adopted this, I guess we can live with the mentality. So they really don't have a true sense of the art of the possible within the record to report space. And maybe said a different way, meeting deadlines is great, but if your deadline's a day 6 deadline when it really should be a day 3 deadline, that's not a winning proposition. And so that really caught my eye and emphasized, do people understand the art of the possible, and are they trying to get there? And lastly, make sure everything is done. That bar moves for those of us who do a lot of work in the the external reporting piece. We know the regulators are asking for more and more disclosures, and we expect that to continue. So the bar will continue to move. The level of analysis and disclosure and accounting underneath that is also going to be larger.
Thank you for that, Bill. The next question is really around where were we feeling the pain, right? At different levels of the organization, whether you're the individual performers, whether you're mid-management, or whether you're executive level, who is feeling what? And what I think is most interesting is when we look at all of the levels, over 50% across the board in each of those levels respectively, you can see here that the pain or the challenges were felt mostly in the reconciliations and the close management. So reconciliation speaking to how, obviously that's the biggest control that most organizations cite and see from a financial reporting perspective. But then secondly, just the ability to get it done, right? And how do I track that as well? And the quality behind that. But even more so disconcerting at all levels is how do I know that we're even done, which is speaking to that close management. So, what is the blueprint for the financial close, and how do I know that we've stepped through that well? How do I know that we're not creating a bunch of redo? How do I know that we're not doing things, in a fashion where the quality is affected because of the steps that we've designed or not necessarily designed to do. So if I've done something out of order and that creates a gap in maybe a reserve that we should have been doing, but the prior steps were not done, so all entries did not make it in to do an adequate calculation on what the reserve should be. So those types of examples really point to how well are we executing steps through the close. The next question really goes into what prevents you from having the most efficient process. Now, this is a key question here, as well as, especially when we think about it in terms of what's the brute force for that we're having to go through right now in a virtual environment. And that goes back to the why are we having problems at all? And so regardless of pandemic, the organizations that we are talking to today are suffering in finance today because of the process not being as efficient as necessary. So as you can see, right, different themes here, thoughts here, but the biggest one really being around lack of standardization, becoming a roadblock to an efficient process. So I don't do things the same way, either at a geo level, at an account level, at a departmental level, or just by person to person that may be supporting the same function. Robert, what do you think here, or as you look at some of these results, what do you think here steps out or sticks out to you further?
Yeah, thanks, Cyril. I mean, just to build on from where you were on the previous slide with the executive and the management view of, I call it sometimes what's keeping you up at night, or, if you take that, both the executive and the management level collectively, just between reconciliations and close management, that's 60% of what's on their mind. So, with that being the case, when you look at that in context with this data, essentially the reality is that without the alignment and support of these groups providing a direction as to where we're going, I think it's a little bit to what Bill was saying earlier. What are we willing to accept? That has a direct impact on what's keeping people from being able to be successful. So the fact on the standardization it's just a key thing that we see again and again and again, that if you don't at least look at the standardized processes that you're running across an entire financial close process, and look to make that a standard that is willing to work within the layers at which you run your business, then the likelihood that you're actually going to get long-term success drops exponentially, right? It just is something that has got to be done at the beginning. So, again, us being a technology provider, a lot of times it's the, hey, silver bullet, you've got technology, I plug it in, it solves it, right? And we've talked a lot about the people impact earlier, but the standardization of the processes that are really driving that are really the key backbone that allow there to be transformation. The other key thing that I pick up on here from the data is that quality and consistency of source data. So there is so much push sometimes about access to data. And again, with the virtual environment, hey, can I access the data? Can I access the data? Well, there's another A before the access, and that's the accuracy. So we got to ensure that the systems are set up to where the most accurate data or the right data sets are actually being accessed by those people that have to perform it or performed across the functions. So, those are the key areas to me that we consistently see that companies sometimes either take for granted or don't take into account. And then they come back looking and say, why didn't that actually perform, or why weren't my KPIs met that I was looking to achieve?
Thank you for that, Robert. As you were kind of talking through the standardization piece, you reminded me of a real experience I had just a couple of years ago when RPA was really hitting the markets, and companies were trying to figure what that was for them and what it meant for them. And a conversation I was having with somebody that managed the reconciliation process for their company, immediately the question as we were talking through automation was, so exactly where does the bot start to do the reconciliation for me? And then how can I see what they did? Right. And the skips, right. A lot of times the idea of automation, we skip the standardization effort that's required. And maybe even drawing out on your accuracy theme, what are those steps that we need to do to ensure that the process is leading to accurate data? And many times we're just thinking about completing a function, not necessarily the reason why we're doing it at all. So great points there. The next question is really, where do we see the biggest challenge during the month-end process? And as we highlighted before, and as you see the averages here come from the different levels that we talked about before, the same type of thing, but just more at a global perspective at the organization. Both reconciliations and close management really account for almost 60% of where the pain points or obstacles exist. Bill, what do you think about this?
One of the things that our clients at the Hackett Group are asking us in increasing numbers is this whole concept of straight-through processing, right? And applying that to the financial processes. So essentially, how much of your transactional work can be done without manual intervention? And so within Record to Report, if you think about reconciliations as an example, how much can be performed automatically through the leverage of tool capabilities coupled with risk ranking, protocol practices? If you think about journal entry automation, our benchmark data shows that world-class companies automate 95% of their journal entries. So, the thought leadership in Record to Report right now is how do I drive to a straight-through processing model for Record to Report? So how do I embed automation end-to-end throughout the entire Record to Report process? And just a comment on close management. We've talked a lot about remote work being the likely model in the future. And if that's the case, the ability to transparently know what is occurring within the close process, as well as, off the close critical path, is going to become even more imperative.
Thank you, Robert. Do you have anything that you'd want to add there?
Yeah, I just think there's a growing maturity that's happening around looking at the financial close. So whether it be from a recommendation of a lot of advisories and such to look at different processes much more holistically than maybe they were just a couple of years ago, all the way to the capabilities of systems to integrate together so much more seamlessly today than they were before. I think all of those coming together really, and I think the data here, again, leaning back to the 60% that you alluded to, Cyril, holistically looking more at a process like Record to Report is really the what we're seeing more and more companies take a step to do, because account reconciliations is always going to come up. It is a key control in the financial close, no doubt about that. But it's done in the context of the overall financial close, and all these other things that are listed in here. If you don't take all those other factors into account as a part of your financial close, you're only addressing a part or parcel of it. So with that in mind, there's the opportunity to look at these processes much more holistically, knowing that the capabilities of technologies are there to enable staffs that are remote to function differently than they were before, all the way to integrating with other systems, integrating with source systems like ERPs in those data sets. So the less human interaction you're having, touching those or interacting with those sometimes can help reduce the likelihood of errors that occur. So looking at systems more holistically is what we're seeing as kind of a maturity factor that people have the opportunity to leverage today. And some that haven't started on automation, that may be net new to them. Others that have done that, they are recognizing that, but many are net new to the process and understanding what the capabilities are.
Thank you. Just anecdotally, we were talking to a company right around the December, January timeframe, and the controller is who we were talking to, and she really advocated, hey, you know what you're talking about sounds like a fantastic idea, but honestly, all of my team is right here outside my office, and the ones that I need to talk to about the close. So as we are stepping through the financial close cycle, if I have any questions, I just pop my head out the door. We got a call back in March at the kind of the end of the month when things were moving right along as they were, saying I made a mistake. And it's really that, it's kind of what you're talking about, that the seamless execution is dependent on something, right? And in our traditional workforce, it's maybe more so, as Bill was kind of pointing out, it's traditionally been focused on this is just how we've always done it. And I use the conversations with people to figure my way through, knowing that we're not going to be returning to the normal that we've had once before. And I don't know that, even at the beginning of this week, many organizations were out there saying, hey, we're going to let our teams stay at home through the end of the year, right? I mean, where would that thought have ever crossed our mind? So the idea that I can operate without technology now to drive this, and that's not just about the blueprint of close or where do I stand in the close steps. It's also how am I making sure that I have visibility, access to data? What are those things or those accelerators that can help, if you will, integrate that data into my process more succinctly is necessary. All right, Kelly, let's go to our next poll question.
Perfect. Thanks, Cyril. Okay, guys, I've now opened the second poll question and set 45 seconds for you to complete it. This question is, what are your organization's key R2R priorities for 2020? Your options are A, delivery of standardized processes, B, reduce complexity, C, achieve a global standard calendar enabled by technology, D, fully leverage shared services, or E, deliver automation projects for more efficient processes. And just a quick reminder, if you guys are looking for that CPE credit today, we have one more poll question that we will be asking.
Thank you, Kelly. So I'm glad we're not going to take 45 minutes to go through this question, but as we step through towards the end, and we're wrapping up here, but Robert, we obviously talk to companies quite a bit around the journey, and that's such an old consulting term that's leveraged, but in the end, there is a journey here that's at stake, and many companies will find themselves in different phases of that journey. Some that may have automated accidentally, some that may have done nothing at all, some that may be trying to figure out how do I leapfrog from where I am today, which is very manual, into a finance organization of the future, which is ultimately kind of the theme of our discussion today. What would you say to companies as they're thinking about how do I get from where I am today to a better state of me and better state of our organization?
Yeah. Thanks, Cyril. I mean, it's a great question, and there's a lot of terms out there, whether it's the historical journey, you've got RPA, you got ML, you got AI, you have automation, you have all these new terms, and as a technology provider, when we interact, it's interesting. When we initially interact, people will take the term automation and say, well, we have an automation initiative, so that equals technology, or technology automatically equals automation. So some companies will initially say, well, look, I just need to automate. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to automate to drive efficiency. So that's what I really need to do right away. But if you're in that manual state, then what we recommend, and where we've seen the biggest transformation, is that you basically do this in the right cadence. So, what we're really trying to help companies understand is that when you're moving from really a manual financial close process, if you really want to get the full value out of technology, and we said it earlier on this call, you first have to just standardize the practices that you're going to follow within your organization. If you're a part of a multinational and you've got hundreds of different business units, or if you're even a smaller business where you're used to everybody being in the office but they're remote now, what are the standards that you operate the business by that you need everybody essentially to follow along with? So, automation of processes is very possible, but we really want to make sure is from a technology provider, we're not automating a bad process. We've heard people before say, hey, can you automate that process? We're like, yeah, it's a really bad process, but we can automate it. Not necessarily what we would recommend that you do. So, when we go through that, you hear specifically from bigger companies, they talk about, well, we're unique. And while I agree with that to a certain degree, I kind of want to cover that a little bit. Yes, every company goes through a financial close process. What makes them unique, essentially, is what we refer to as the compliance framework which they drive their business. What are those risk tolerances that you drive certain parts of the businesses by, and how do you manage to those? Because what you want to be able to do is take that uniqueness to your business, layer that into whatever technology you're providing, because it's that combined with your standardized practices that is really going to enable you to be on the right type of path for transformation. So risk, materiality thresholds are just some examples, that we uncover in that. So once we get through that process, we actually get to where we find most companies have not ever done before, which is to really quantify all the stakeholders involved in their financial close. We talked earlier about the reconciliation process being a key control. If you only grab the reconciliation users, is that really everybody in the financial close? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 60%? Whatever it is, it's not 100% who's all involved in the financial close. So again, knowing that you have the abilities to look at this holistically, and technology can do this holistically today, take that step to really define who are all the individuals, stakeholders that are involved in the actual financial close, and make sure they're accounted for in the standardization and the access or the utilization of the technology you're going to use. That's what we refer to as the process optimization step, which is critical, because once you actually have that full visibility, you're actually now in the best position to automate. So when you do that, one of the common things that we actually see that get exposed in that process optimization stage, there's redundant tasks, there's dependent tasks. There are things like that are actually occurring that could actually be accelerated quite a bit through automation, but also they're actually slowing down the entire process or adding additional layers of complexity where that they don't have to exist. So once we're at that stage, yes, the leveraging of RPA, AI, and ML in ways that can sustain and transform your business is the best way to approach that. So this is the approach that we've taken with a lot of companies. There's journeys here. And this can happen of what can we accomplish in year one? Where do we really want to be by year three? And aspirationally, where do we want to be by year five? And there's a big difference there, because usually everybody can understand in the next 12 months, here are the key things we need to improve on. But let's do that in the context of where are you trying to be in 3 years? Technology is going to continue to evolve. No question about that. Things are going to continue to change. But where do you kind of want to be in 3 years? Let's make sure that that's mapped in. And then also have line of sight to where things can be in 5 years. We talked earlier about how different things are going to be by 2025 from a human capital perspective, from a technology perspective, from all these different areas. All of these you can account for and get short-term wins while also having long-term sustainability. Cyril?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Robert. Both Bill and Robert, thank you very much for kind of providing your insights as we walk through the surveys here. As we close out today, we had last month announced a offer to companies to participate in a free trial offer around the closed solution. So we just want to make sure you guys are aware of that, and there's still time to take advantage. If you're a large enterprise organization, that's really our Cadency solution. If you're an organization that's closer to the mid-market size, Adra is really the solution that we use there. But we want to be able to give you a chance to kind of experience and also help yourselves as well, especially if you don't have any automation or capabilities in place today to manage the teams. If you're one of those companies that we talked about that are doing, phone calls and conference calls every day to try and figure out where we're at in the overall process. This can give you a chance to leverage technology, get some of that experience. So it's a free access to leverage our solutions. We've got a program around that if Kelly will give you some information on where you can contact us to find and learn more about that, to sign up to take advantage of that offer. With that in mind, again, Bill and Robert, thank you again for your insights here and walking through the conversation today. And Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Cyril. Okay, guys, if you are looking for that CPE credit, that poll question is now live on the screen. And with that, we are at the end of the webinar today. If you want any more information or access to any additional resources, please take a moment to visit Trintech's website. Finally, before we go, I just want to remind you all in the next couple of days, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar, so you will have the ability to review it again at your leisure. And with that, I'd like to say a very big thank you to Bill, Robert, and Cyril for speaking today, and of course to all of you for taking the time to join us. And with that, we will see you all next time.